Hi, welcome back to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. I'm Doug O'Brien, your host, and I'm joined today by one of the first people I've ever had on this podcast many years ago at this point, and I'm very, very excited to have him back. There's none other than Stephen Gilligan, the great, in my mind, great Stephen Gilligan. He is author of many books about Ericksonian hypnosis and other related subjects. He's one of the first people that really, was willing to teach me, because I had a music major background, not a psychology major background. So I owe a lot of why I'm here today to him. And I'm thrilled to have him here to talk about his latest work and things like that. So I'm not going to spend any more time doing an introduction. If you don't know who Stephen Gilligan is, you will today, or just Google him before we get started. He's worth knowing. And if you do know it, then he doesn't need any introduction. So I'll just shut up and we'll get this show on the road. Here we go. You are listening to the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast, a show devoted to uncovering the systems and the secrets that set the best apart, where you learn how to take your coaching clients to the next level, while you grow the coaching practice of your dreams. So sit back and relax, or sit up and get excited. Either way, you might want to pay attention. This could be important. Hey, Steve.
Hey, Doug. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good. Good. Here in Encinitas, California, a little beach town above San Diego, and we're having torrential rains for 3 days, which we deeply need.
Well, hopefully it's going to
everybody knows
about
the LA fires, and that was really in no small part due to the fact that we haven't had any rain this winter. So I'm here in the rain.
Good. And you just say, yeah, bring it on. All you can give us, we'll take it. But is there danger of mudslides? I think there are in LA. Are there any around you?
In LA, where it burned down. I'm about 2 hours south, about 30 minutes north of San Diego, right on a beach, and I live on Crest Drive on top of the hill.
Okay.
So I think we're okay.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that. And you spend a lot of time in other places in China, Japan, Germany. Yes.
Well, I was a road warrior for many, many years. 40 years. 2018, before COVID, or 2019, I should say, I was on the road 218 days, mostly internationally. And then COVID, was a big pattern interrupter. And I was home for 2 years, quarantined with my daughter, who moved back because of COVID. And now I'm really enjoying working probably about half that much on the road.
So, but still, that's 100 some odd days on the road.
That's a lot. Yeah. I mean, I just came back from Brazil, and I was there for 10 days. And then in January, I was in Morocco and Paris and Munich. But now I don't leave the country until June, which is great.
Great. So you're enjoying some rain and family time. You have a 2.5-year-old granddaughter?
I do. Her name is River, and I have to confess, I'm sure people will hear a lot about her.
Yeah. So you heard it here first, folks, but you'll be a lot about River in the days and weeks and years to come from the Irish storyteller Stephen Gilligan. So, Steve, I am fascinated by some things that you told me in preparation for this, and that is there's a new iteration, a new evolution of your work, and I'd like to hear more about that. But I'm also I'm just fascinated by that fact, like that you have an evolution of your work. I mean, how often does this happen? I mean, I am just still trying to get my head around doing Ericksonian hypnosis pretty good, and you've moved on several times. I'm just curious, like, how does that happen? I want to model you. Like, what is the question that you ask yourself that leads you to these new evolutions and stuff? I'm really, really curious about that. But first, what are you working on? What's the new evolution?
Well, maybe I'll generally briefly address the second, what you're calling the second.
Okay,
I sincerely feel that our deepest creative path isn't something that we are making up from our individual ego mind, but it's something that's coming through us. And, you could say a river of consciousness runs through us. And to me, the whole value of trance, once you get out of the booga booga stuff and into trance as a natural attunement to universal consciousness that has 10,000 different ways to show up, then you realize that the most important hero's journey, if you will, the most important part of your creative path, which is how you're going to find happiness and how you're going to hopefully make a positive difference into the world. It's coming through you. I think this is obvious when you look at the lifetime's work of any creative person. They've got 4 or 5 epics, 4 or 5 chapters. And I don't think we're choosing them. Most of us talk a good talk, but our ego really doesn't want to change. But sometimes in the work that we do with people, we're working with people who don't necessarily want to change, but something is forcing them to change.
Yeah.
And so to me, I see that, when I look at, I've been on my professional path, believe it or not, 50 years now. And I would say it's gone through six different epics, and each one had a beginning and an end, and then a sort of a difficult, tumultuous transitional period, a death and a rebirth cycle. And again, I mentioned that partly about myself, but more importantly, in terms of understanding why and when people are coming to see us to do work with them, because they're going through a death and a rebirth transition. So I think, if we look at it with COVID, we are in a meta crisis for the ages. I don't think it's a subtle meta crisis. I see that. I think we will agree that every mainstream organization, politics, education, psychotherapy, political, cultural structures, they're all crumbling. They're all breaking apart. And our relationship to beyond human consciousness, which is of course the vast majority of consciousness, is beyond human. The way that we have engaged in this dissociated way with the environment and with animals and with plant life and so forth, has raped the world, I think, in a way that we're teetering on these edges in terms of, you look at, I think there's 6 major values that in order for life to maintain itself, it has to be within a certain range. And apparently we have gone way over on 4 of them. And so if we continue in the way that we have been living, we're probably not going to make it. I don't mean to be morbid, but
Yes.
so out of that, and partly I had my patterns deeply interrupted of being like a road warrior, and partly because of COVID, thinking it's something about our connection to the living consciousness and the soul of nature that is one of the keys. I do at least a couple meditations a day, and I would meditate at least one day out in my backyard here. And I would meditate sort of just holding the question, who was I before humans were here? I think it's the sort of question, from doing Ericksonian type of trance, that you realize I can ask any question and I can open in any way. And if my attention and intention is good, I'll probably get a productive response out of exploring that question. So from that, we're really looking at this idea that I think has been growing in all, looking at all symptoms when we see, people coming to see us, not because they're suffering, but because they've been suffering for a long time. We can't change the fact that there's a lot of suffering. There's failures, there's betrayals, there's disappointments, there's deaths, and so forth. But we're not there to work with that. When people come to see us, is they've had one of these identity level experiences, and they're stuck. They can't move on in their life, and they're stuck inside of that difficult emotion, and it's coloring and limiting everything that they have. I think that's happening at a global level for us humans. And so the work that I've been evolving, that's gone on these epics over 50 years is called creative mind. And it's really looking at this idea that dissociation or disconnection is the shared characteristic of all persistent suffering. We can do that at an individual level. People are disconnected from their resources when they go into a traumatic memory. They go into a state-dependent locking with it. So they're in that very difficult experience, but they're dissociated from everything else in their life, which is, again, part of what I think trance is really good for. We sort of loosen the contraction and come back to this place where we can be centered and open, so that whatever is stuck in our nervous system, we can download it into that sort of conversational container. And in that container, it's interconnected with everything, and it has fluidity. It's more like things, So I think we're headed to that. So this work of creative mind is really opening beyond individual work or small systems work, and try to see how the same patterns are applying at national levels or cultural levels or global levels.
That's amazing. Thank you. It's also interesting to me that one of the things that I think has characterized your work over the years, apart from other hypnotherapists that I've studied with or have come across or met or talked to, is what you've just said, that the dissociation is usually what we do in hypnosis. Let's dissociate from our bodies. Let's float out of our bodies and see things, from a mental, viewpoint, float over the timeline. And I can see my body down there, but I'm detached from it.
Yeah.
When I did my surgery, using just hypnosis, I had
Sure.
I was nowhere near my body. I was in Hawaii.
Sure.
Mentally, when my body was in the operating room. So dissociation can be really valuable in that way. But you're talking in a sense about the opposite, using trance to, be embodied more and have the whole system, the mental body
Absolutely.
connected. So I think that's
I think a better term than dissociation would be a differentiation.
okay.
And what we get from, I think one of the core parts of Milton Erickson's legacy is that every phenomenon, every method, every technique has equal capacity to be constructive or destructive. And a lot of it depends on the underlying context in which you're doing that thinking or that acting or that feeling. And what we would call, negative dissociation is that you separate out, which is really a helpful thing, and sometimes a necessary thing.
Yeah,
I always
absolutely.
say to people, clients, when you dissociated when you were younger, that was a great act of self-love. That
Absolutely.
was the best that you could do. You couldn't stay present. You didn't have the resources internally or externally. And so dissociation is an incredible short-term resource. Long-term life strategy, it sucks.
Right, right,
So,
right.
so what we're looking to do when we look at this term differentiation is, what we see in therapeutic trance. Let's take, classical or like, what you're talking about. I float out of my body during a surgery or during some intense pain. Take something like hand levitation. The feeling in a therapeutic trance when it's like, wow, this is great, is my hand is lifting. My ego is not doing it, but I could stop it anytime I'd like. Whereas in a symptom, I'm not doing it. It feels ego dystonic. That is, it feels really negative to my small sense of self, and I don't have any influence with it.
Right.
So that is not in the technique. That is in the context of the technique.
Gotcha.
And that, to me, like, that's the heart of Erickson's so-called utilization. That you accept and make creative use of every pattern that a client is attached to,
Right.
because working from their interior, what we might call psychological immune system, is really a key to extended positive change. And it's
Exactly.
one of the big differences between Erickson's work and traditional hypnosis.
Right, right, right. No, I get that. And I also see how the idea of utilization of the arm catalepsy, the arm levitation, when the person's hand is up there all by itself, um, I know it's my hand, but it's acting by itself. I'm not doing that. And I could stop it so that Erickson was able to utilize that and say, well, yes, and how is that, metaphorically exactly what you're doing in life? You could stop that. It is your life. It is your body. You could do that. So in a way, it's that utilization of that hypnotic phenomenon to
Yeah,
create a
and this
realization.
shift is not primarily a verbal shift. It's a nonverbal
Yeah,
consciousness shift.
right.
In the work that I do, we talk about the unconscious as the nonverbal nature consciousness that the right brain is particularly attuning to. It's the mothership. It's the base.
Hmm.
And then you have this very Johnny-come-lately Pandora's box of this verbal virtual. The first artificial AI system is the analytical verbal mind, and if that verbal mind, the conscious mind, we call it in trance, is sort of floating and swimming in the ocean
Mm.
of that deeper level right mind, then what you do and think will have positive value. It's grounded and it's interconnected. So to me,
Yeah.
that's what we're trying to do in the work. Before we ask somebody to address, something really challenging that they've been defeated by, let's make sure that you're in your best possible state. And that would be one simple definition of what's the best possible state. It's a state where your primary consciousness is like mindfulness. You're like in a Monet painting. You're centered. You're meditative. You feel the flow of different things. You feel this wide scan. In the right hemisphere, the light is more like a lantern. In the secondary satellite of the verbal brain mind, the light is like a flashlight. And so it's this connection between the two levels and this mutually respectful, creative conversation. That's where everything that's there can become a resource.
Okay. It's whenever I talk to you, I think like, I don't have to say anything. This is just great. Um, let me just ask you this, Steve. Because from day one, well, not day one, of course, but from your earliest times with Erickson, with Bandler and Grinder, you started off as an NLP person with Bandler and Grinder, and were introduced
Pre-NLP.
pre-NLP, right? Exactly. And you were introduced to Erickson through them, and
Through Bateson.
through Bateson as well. Was it directly Bateson, or was it through Bandler and Grinder through Bateson?
Bateson and Bandler and Grinder were all living in the same property up in the Santa Cruz Mountains.
Okay.
It belonged to the publisher of Science Behavior Books, who did produce Tears books. And Bateson read Structure Magic 1, which was the first Bandler Grinder work, and he said, wow, you guys are onto something. If you really want to know about multi-level communication, go study the Great Purple One out in the desert. This was before Prince, you know. And so they went to see Erickson, and they came back, and I fell head over heels. So when they went back, this is 1974, when they went back 3 months later, they brought me with them.
I see. Wow. 74. So you were a freshman in college.
I know. I actually was my second year. I had done a year, and then I had dropped out of university. I was working in a steel mill in the Oakland ghettos in the Bay Area, and I was very suicidal.
Wow.
Well, I had this voice that was saying, I don't want to live this life. I don't want to live this life. And I thought, we're getting a little, do you hear that feedback?
No, I don't.
Okay. I thought it meant kill myself.
Yeah.
And I struggled against it. You know, in steel mills, you have, for better and worse, you have big earmuffs and these protective glasses. So nobody could see I was just crying.
Oh, wow.
And finally, I had enough drugs. This was, 1972, the San Francisco area. There was a lot of sex, drugs, rock and roll. And I got some drugs, went over to my home where I grew up. My parents weren't gone. And I fully thought I was going to kill myself. And finally, I said, I'm not going to fight this voice. And I thought that meant, but when I said that, I surrendered to it. It was like this dam broke loose. And, my father was a very violent alcoholic, and he used to throw me up against the wall and say, look at me when I'm hitting you. And I would say, the more you hit me, the weaker you get and the stronger I'll get. I'll never break down. So that was a great thing for that youngster, but then it kind of, has you walking around. So in a dissociated state. So when I said that, I sobbed and I sobbed and I sobbed. And as the river slowly started to subside, it was like one of those old movies where you see the newspaper headlines.
Yeah.
And that was like that, an image like that. And it was the Santa Cruz campus where I was, doing my undergraduate work. And it was just all of a sudden so clear. That's what that voice was saying, that I was heading down a path that the Irish men in my family, alcoholism, depression, cynicism, that was my sort of transgenerational path. And that voice was saying, I don't want to lead that life. And it was then showing me this path. And I called up Santa Cruz. I said, I want to re-register. And they said, tomorrow's the last day. I said, okay, I'll be there. And I jumped in my Volkswagen van, drove down Highway 1, an hour and a half from San Francisco to Santa Cruz. I registered. They said, well, you have to pick classes. I said, okay, give me the manual. And it was kind of like a Ouija board, really.
Really?
Like there's a course by this guy, Gregory Batson,
Batson,
Steps to
yes.
an Ecology of Mind. Oh, that looks that, the Ouija board. And then the second course
The
called
whole
The
finger
Political
of fate.
Economy of the United States by John Grinder,
Say that again. What
which
was it
was
called?
Political Economy of the United States, which was a Marxist critique of the American state and an espousal to overthrow the United States by any means necessary. That was Grinder.
That was John Grinder. Wow.
Yeah, he had just met Richard Bandler, but he was a radical Marxist. And, 1974, that seemed like mainstream to San Francisco, Santa Cruz kid.
Right.
So that's how I met them. And then 3 months into that, I met Erickson.
Wow. Amazing. 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 Huh. So, and somewhere along the line, very famous anecdotal story of you being double inducted, hypnotized by Bandler on one side and Grinder on the other side, inducing you into a deep trance identification with Erickson. And that the story goes, and I'm sure you can correct me, that you were then basically confined to a wheelchair for, I don't know, 6 months or something like that. A purple wheelchair, I think I've heard.
Well, kind of.
Go ahead.
I wasn't confined to it. We found an old, like 1940s wooden antique wheelchair with a purple seat at one of those garage sales, and it's like, okay, great. So when I did the trance work, I would go into that and do a deep trance identification with Erickson. Basically, sort of the ambiance of that time was every day, see how many far out, interesting states of consciousness that you can open. In the end, it was partly part of the times. It was a pretty experimental time, and we had this group of about a dozen students who were really close, part of that original Bandler Grinder group. That this was 1974. It didn't become an LP until 77, which is when I left to go to graduate school over the hill at Stanford. So we were reading these hypnosis journals and found this research by a Russian psychologist named Rykov. And it was talking about deep trance identification, how he would teach people in a trance to do a deep trance identification with a famous painter like Rembrandt.
Mm-hmm.
And then he would have them paint either in the Rembrandt trance or as their ordinary self. And then he would have people judge the quality of the paintings, and found that they were significantly higher quality when they were in the identification with Rembrandt. So we thought, wow, that's great. Let's do. And one of us said, let's do it with Erickson. So it was at Richard Bandler's place. I don't think they did a double induction. I think Grinder did the induction right before, because I mentioned that Gregory Bateson just lived 50 yards away in another house. One of them said, hey, let's go see if Gregory's home. He's going to find this very interesting, because Erickson and Bateson had a 50-year personal and professional close relationship.
Wow.
And I was Bateson's student. So he came lumbering over. Gregory was this really big, 6'6", awkward, dissociated British academic, elitist Buddhist. And, Erickson was this little American guy who was just like so socially intelligent. They were kind of like, Mutt and Jeff, the odd couple. And he came over and he sat there, and I did this deep trance. And long story short, I started talking with Bateson about information that was privy to the two of them.
Get out of here.
And Bateson jumped up halfway through and ran out of the room. He was so frightened. And he said to Grinder, that was the only authentic case of voodoo possession I've ever seen. That's right.
Oh, goodness gracious. Wow. So yeah. Connection with the everything that once you get into that state.
I think so. And to me, it's important to emphasize, I'm not talking about something unique to me. I'm talking about something that is a core dimension of the deeper creative unconscious that we all swim in.
Mm-hmm.
That we have the capacity to experience, to see, to live from an infinite number of points of view. And when we get stuck, when we can't change, it's because we're rigidly identified. That means we're in some experience and we do this neuromuscular lock. That's why we say relax. That's why we feel rhythm, resonance, repetition as a way to unbind the lock, and then realize that we should have multiple contradictory reference points for being able to explore whatever it is. That's basic AI. One of my Achilles heels is my teeth. I've got like 8 dental implants, and when I go into my oral surgeon, she doesn't use X-rays; those are so old school. But those resonance images that you say, there's a little bar, and you step in, you say, "Be still," and for about 45 seconds, it whirs around you, and it takes 300 different images, infrared images, and then has the software to combine those into some sort of systemic integral pattern, so that when I then go into her office 10 minutes after we've gotten this, she can show me on the computer 1,000 different perspective of what's going on in my teeth. And she can use it to measure, to plan, to kind of see things from n-dimensional. That's pretty basic, to where we are with those resonance images. But what if we had that as a minimum? We said, I'm really stuck in my relationship. I'm really stuck in my professional career. Now, we have these political fights about everything and anything. What if we had this space where we first dropped down into a place where we weren't identified with any particular map, had an intention, and then made sure that we had at least 300, like that simple program, different maps. And then what we're interested is finding a fit where all 300 of those maps had the optimal organizational integrity. That's what this left brain, I think, is there to do. That it's a miracle. But every time we lock our nonverbal self, we freeze it into a single frame. And we don't have human presence flowing through it. So it only comes on its automatic and hence negative form. So what we're trying to do is open this space where you can surrender. Not to the goblins, and but like dropping into the ocean, and you can wade in the water. And then take your simple intent, positive intention, and then make sure that you gather up at least 10 multiple contradictory representations that you're then going to play music with, or create a healing meal with, or be a great performance team, like a team of athletes, where the part-whole relationship is really the most important guide. Make sense?
The part-whole relationship is the most important.
Yeah. So every part of, like, to me, in the work, we talk about the prototype part. So we have a wholeness. That's what the right brain is.
Mm-hmm.
Unbroken, interconnected wholeness. You
Right.
can't break it into any pieces. It's one. Then we have the secondary, which breaks everything into pieces, which means I can say, let's imagine going to the moon. And I can set that as a North Star. And then I can break the whole into many different pieces and see how we can arrange this sequence that would allow us to take the steps to arrive at this place that never existed before. So when you look at that, you see that there's one brain mind, the deeper unconscious, has wholeness. The other brain mind, which is always secondary, has parts. What we see in all of the beautiful human expressions, like a good meal. I don't know if you like to cook. You might be the first Irish person. You know the definition of a 7-course Irish meal, right? A 6-pack of Guinness and a potato. But if those people who like cooking, how do you know the dish is ready? Right? You do the taste test.
Yeah. Yep.
And you're feeling are all the flavors in a good balance. It needs a little salt. It needs a little spice. Same thing for a group of musicians. You play piano.
I do.
So whether it's what your right hand and your left hand are doing, or if you're playing with other musicians, every part of that system has to be in a high performance state. Every part of the system has to be skillful. But the real music doesn't happen until all the different instruments start playing in a differentiated whole. And then that's, to me, what trance is something that takes off.
Yeah.
You feel I'm on a trip, so it's me, and I need to surf the wave, and I need to make these decisions. But the creative consciousness is not here. Creative consciousness is coming through me. So how I organize my mind body will either block it or let it flow. That's on a continuum.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How I can take these different pieces, what that instrument is playing, what that instrument is playing, it's really open, but I have to have some way of finding out how to do that in a way that really produces the part whole flow. So for therapeutic work, to me, the prototype parts are intention, obstacle, and resources. And so we need to have each of those 3 prototype parts in that fluid conversational space. It needs to be positively valued. It needs to be held in a way so that, like a dream symbol, it can open, it can go anywhere, everywhere, all at once. And then really we're looking to see how those 3 parts can play music together. And then you got a winner.
That's beautiful. You said before, I think it was before we started talking here, that you no longer do individual sessions, private sessions with people. You've stopped your private practice.
Right. Yeah.
We've just been talking about, seems like it would be great for a private practice. That would be to do.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, of course, I do a lot of sessions in my trainings.
Within your training.
I thought it was really important. That's the base. The base of this work is what works in a private session.
Got it. Yeah.
But I for 45 years thought that my professional development really required sort of a balance between writing about it, teaching about it, and practicing it.
Mm-hmm.
because they're three very different modes of learning. And now, I just turned 70, and I have a granddaughter who lives with me. And, I was traveling, teaching so much. It's like, I don't feel I need that, especially because still in all the teaching virtually and in person, I'm doing at least two demos a day.
All right. So let me ask you this. So your time right now, you're traveling half the time that you used to, but it's still a lot. But it does mean that you're home probably 200 days out of a year. Are you doing
Yeah,
more
and
writing? Is this
maybe doing more what?
writing?
I'm trying to, it's like, I mean, I probably do 100 virtual days. Like, I mean, this is an hour of virtual,
Right.
but for China, I do 25 days of virtual.
Oh, okay. Okay.
There's a number of during the COVID, I did this creative mind work that I developed. We had two extended, like a 25-day and a 15-day certification course that was all virtual. I like doing virtual.
Yeah.
I like it.
Can people who are listening to this podcast get in on any of those virtual trainings? Do you offer them like to the public?
Absolutely. They can, look at my website. It's www.stephengilligan.com. Operators are
Gilligan.
standing by.
They are not. Maybe virtual ones are.
Yeah, everything I do is you can find out about on the website.
Great. StephenGilligan.com. I'll try to remember that. So Creative Mind, you've been doing it for a number of years now. It's the latest iteration, but it's not just from yesterday. It's 5 years. Yeah.
Yeah,
And so
now when I teach like the advanced course in Generative Trance, which is the name that I gave sort of my next generation version of Erickson's work, I sort of focus on a 5-day workshop on each chapter of the work. So it started with Erickson. I mean, you could say it started with Bandler Grinder, but the trance stuff started with Erickson, and that was 1974. When I was 37, my dad died suddenly and unexpectedly. My daughter was born a week later, and that connection, we were alluding to it with the wheelchair and sitting in a wheelchair and channeling Erickson. I thought I could milk that to my dying days. But it was like a steel door came down, and it was really scary and confusing because that was one of the few things I could always rely on. When in doubt, go into trance, and then have this presence of Ericksonian consciousness. And it was blocked to me. And after I whined and moaned and complained for a couple months, I realized, oh, this is supposed to happen. This is supposed to happen. That's the sort of the life cycle model that we're using in terms of when and why do people develop symptoms. You're going on a path, you grow, life changes, and then you get to a place where who you were before, what you did before, your life circumstances before have now radically changed. And so you can't use the old ego conscious mind pattern. Thankfully, the way you think about trust when you're 4, hopefully you don't have the same maps about trust when you're 40, because life would be even more difficult. So periodically, not every day, we're going through these periods of continuity marked by discontinuity. Continuity, it's kind of business as usual. You can do your ordinary stuff. But when you get to these discontinuities, which may be 4 or 5, 6 times in your life, either developmentally, there's a marriage, there's a death, there's a leaving home, there's a graduation, there's a retirement, etc. Those are the classic developmental markers that predict who is most likely to develop medical and psychological symptoms. Or something happens, like COVID hits or Donald Trump is elected president, some sort of major thing out in the world. And so how you have carried yourself up to that point is no longer viable. And so your maps that you have used for stability fall apart. I think that's what's happening at a global level. And if you shut down, you will create horrible negative symptoms. Because the unconscious is kind of got its foot on the accelerator. And if the conscious mind is locking it down, that relationship between the two minds creates symptoms. If, however, you can step back from everyday life, because you have to be a little bit conservative in how you present yourself. Take a step back. That's what trance is for. Find what Campbell called sacred space, which could mean you sing Broadway musicals while you're taking a shower. A place where you have no worries. You're not comparing yourself. Your health is not an issue. You're just in that state. That's generative trance.
Right.
And then you take what is broken or what the stuff that is so negative and ego dystonic, and you hold it in that generative space like an ocean, and everything relaxes. Every part can feel still and fluid and find their positive value. That was Erickson's work, welcoming each part.
Yeah.
And then as you have them circulate around, then they find new synthesis of new organizational connections. And that's your next generation.
Beautiful. Yeah, I get that. And I also remember one of the things that you and I have in common, you've studied Tai Chi a lot more than I have, but I have done it.
Not Tai Chi, like Japanese.
Chi.
I did Taekwondo.
I'm sorry, Aikido.
Aikido for 16 years, the last 16 years of my 26 year.
Yeah, sorry. So I have done Tai Chi. I've done some Aikido, but you've done a lot of Aikido. And the principles of Aikido seem to be, very much in line with what you were just talking about.
Totally.
But the welcoming of the energy, that you can't resist it. You put up the resistance, and it's like it's not going to work. But if you just
totally
welcome it into the system, then you can utilize what's there. You can go with the flow and shift.
Right. Yeah, it's really amazing that Morihei Ueshiba was the founder of Aikido, and he was a little guy, like 4'10", like Milton Erickson, these little Yodas. And Erickson developed a lot of his understanding through his polio paralysis.
Yes.
He couldn't move his voluntary muscles for much of his life. And moving voluntary muscles is how you stay out of a trance. Ueshiba was just training endlessly in martial arts. So they used sort of opposite paths to arrive at the same thing. I think Aikido, three characters in Japanese. I comes from the Chinese for love. So I had a Chinese wife. So it's wa ni babe. I love you. I love you, baby. Wa I. And it gets changed to the Japanese unconsciously. When I ask them what a character means, they said put their head down. They show me a somatic model unconsciously. And when I say what's ki, they do something like this. So you have this organic pattern of something. And he, I means that you join with it. You're walking the same path with it. Ki is from the Chinese qi, which is sort of this subtle, we would say invisible, prematerial light that runs through everything and binds and interconnects everything. Nice work if you can get it. Christianity would, I think, the Holy Spirit would be a similar term. And Dao is from the Chinese Dao, the way, the path, the deep path.
Wow, I never put that
So,
together.
yeah.
I didn't. That's great.
Yeah.
Wow, words. Cool.
Yeah.
So what? Tell me just briefly how, when you're doing these seminars and stuff, and you're presenting this creative mind idea. Do you do the group trances with folks? How do you get them to be feeling this connection with themselves if they haven't done that before? If they're not, I mean, what's the road in? How do we, listening to you say, yeah, that sounds good, I want some of that. How do we do that? How do we get? Because just as an aside, years ago, I heard you say, and then I sort of took it as something, I'm going to do that. You said you made a rule for yourself of doing hypnosis every day, that, no trance, no breakfast. And so I said, I'm going to do that. So I did, self-hypnosis every day for a long time. Not necessarily in the morning, but usually in the morning. And it's been incredibly fruitful for that. So I'm a
it's number one on the list. Practice, practice, practice. You are what you practice.
How do you present? How can somebody who's listening to this podcast how can somebody do that? What's a way in?
Well, you're asking how do I express it in workshops, and I think it would be roughly similar if doing a one-on-one. There's something that you want. Erickson used to say, motivation is the most important thing. So what is it that this person wants?
Okay.
You then kind of point out that when they try to realize that goal with their verbal ego, it's not going so well. So you say there's an additional intelligence that is possible to safely and deeply tap into. And then you open a little inquiry. So, you could talk about other people. You can do a group process. You do a lot of demonstrations directly with people. The sort of the main, I'd say the prototype question for the first step is, when you are stressed out, when you need to reconnect to yourself, you've just been working 40 days and 40 nights, and you think, "Oi, I have to come back to myself." What do you do that works for you? And, I have people say, so people just say, in a sentence, what do you do? And you hear the usual suspects, like, I go for a walk in nature. I play music. I do my meditation, or I work in my garden. If you ask me, I play with my granddaughter. The Pacific Ocean, which I can see from the room here to a mile and a half away, but it's close. I go down to the ocean, and that brings me to a different state, and the thing that I learned from Erickson is that the experiential means by which you open something trance-like, it's much better if it's natural and in the experiential patterns of that person. So once we identify, when I need to feel good, when I need to reconnect, or when I've done this before, all of a sudden I was not in this sort of ego state where everything is being judged, good versus bad. Am I better? Am I worse? What's going on? Problem. And when you ask people, when you do those things, what happens to your internal dialogue? And most people say it disappears. Great. Do you feel more or less in control? Control is not really the proper term. It's not that I don't feel out of control, but I don't feel like I need to control.
Mm-hmm.
And then in those states where you're down at the ocean, or you're reading a good book, or playing with your grandchild, or playing a piece of music, where does yourself end? It's 10 o'clock at night. You've been working 30 years in psychotherapy to find your boundaries. Where are your boundaries? And even everybody looks like an Italian at that point. They say there's no boundary. So we say that is your an example of your true nature. That is an example of the true nature of yourself. So then, how do you open that? First, when you just need to, probably first, most of us, we step away from the stressful places. What am I going to do about this person?
Yep.
And I just take my little time during the day. And then what I have added over the last 5 years, especially, is really recognize this is your true nature. So when you're caught in worrying or anxiety or fear or compulsivity, you're dissociated from your true nature. And these are ways to come back. And you identify what ways work for you really well, and then you practice them so that then when the shit hits the fan, which as I always say is a short distance away, you say, okay, here's where I step back, I reawaken that generative space, and only to the extent that I have good connection to that will I ask myself or trust myself to address something challenging in my life.
Practice. Beautiful.
Yeah, and it has to be something you enjoy practicing. You have to find stuff that, when I do this, I don't know, you got your piano there. I don't know if you could say that generally, most of the time when you start playing the piano, it's a really pleasurable state.
Yeah.
So it's like intrinsic. That's kind of what Csikszentmihalyi, the Hungarian psychologist who did all this research on flow, he said it's intrinsically rewarding. You're not doing it because you're going to get fame and fortune. You're doing it primarily because the feeling of being in that state is unbelievably positive.
Right. Well, I know you have to go, and I just so much appreciate your time. I want to respect the boundary of when we said we'd finish this. So I could talk to you all day, obviously, and listen to you most of it. But
there's got to be a number of jokes about two Irishmen sitting and talking.
There's got to be more than a couple, yeah, for sure.
How many generations back are the O'Briens? Did they come from Ireland?
All the way. No, my great-grandfather came over, so 1890s or so. We've been here.
Yeah, there's a big, yeah. My grandparents, my dad's mother and father came over from Ireland. Didn't know each other. But they made their way to San Francisco, where there was a large Irish population. They met at 17, uneducated and without any money, at a Hibernia club. That's like an Irish club, which is kind of the way that American immigrants have done it for the course of our history.
Yeah, for sure. There's lots of different ethnic clubs around New York City that. Sure, it's fantastic. And my great grandparents were both O'Briens, although from different. They didn't know each other, and they're different O'Briens. But my great grandmother and my great grandfather didn't have to change their name when they got married, which is kind of fun.
Awesome. Well, the Irish culture has got a lot of sadness and a lot of pain, but so much beauty
and a lot of good poetry and storytelling.
Yeah, and do you know who? What's his name? John O'Donohue.
Sure.
He was an Irish priest who unfortunately died prematurely, and he was an ex-priest by then. But he was on doing a day long with Dan Siegel, the UCLA psychiatrist who does all this great stuff on mindfulness. And they were talking about poetry in the brain are the kind of language that is really helpful in psychotherapy conversations. And O'Donoghue said, we speak a very different kind of English than our big brothers to the east, twinkle, twinkle, the big brothers being the English.
English, yes.
He says, because when we go to speak, we see a lot of invisible presences. And the English don't seem to see them anymore. But we have to include them. That's why the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Inventory, the Irish are off the charts in depression, alcoholism, and schizophrenia. and schizophrenia means magical thinking.
Yes.
Well, you don't see the leprechauns, huh? You don't see them. I can't believe it. So as I try to make sure my granddaughter knows, sweetheart, River is her name. Always see the invisible presences. We need them. We need, kind of like Gabriel Garcia, the Colombian writer, did 100 Years of Solitude. And he invented this whole genre of magical realism, that we live in this beautiful blended world of realism that can be really harsh and magic. And it's the integration of those two that makes for a good life. And I think that pretty strongly. There's different ways of understanding it. There's many different traditions, but we need to walk in two worlds. To walk in two worlds. Yeah. Okay, Doug, thanks for having me on, and lovely to talk with you as usual.
As usual.
And to be continued.
Hopefully we'll do this again before another 3 years go past.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, everybody. Hope that was helpful for you.
Thanks. StephenGilligan.com. We'll see you there.
Yeah.
This has been the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure seeing you again. Hope to see you again real soon. Come back next week when we have another gripping and exciting episode of the Essential Coaching Skills Podcast. And if you want to, you can find out more about us, each and every one of us, at essentialcoachingskills.com. Thanks.